Heather Kenkel. So here is my original title, Teaching ELs from the Perspective of this book, which I thought was a really interesting book. I kind of wish I would have done a whole chat just on this book, maybe another time. And mostly I'm just taking the information from the chapter on teaching ELs from this book. So I teach in Fargo at South High. We have probably over 100 ELs, and I say we, so Courtney is here too. She teaches with me at Fargo South. We both have our, I guess I'm just introducing you to Courtney.
Yeah, that's okay.
We both have our masters. Welcome, Courtney Johnson. We both have our masters in teaching ELs from Valley City State University. We also have our math degrees, so we have both teaching ELs and math. And so we teach together at Fargo South, and we really only have one EL class at Fargo South for like a pre-algebra for students that aren't quite ready for content or grade level content. And the other classes we teach are what's called sheltered instruction, where we teach Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, Informal Geometry, Algebra 1 block. I think that might be it, where we just use like all of the same standards as the other math classrooms, but then we just infuse some of the EL strategies, trying to make the content more comprehensible. There's so many people that when they find out that I teach EL and math, they say, oh yeah, that must be the easy one for them to do because, you know, math is the same in any language. So I don't know if you've ever heard this, so I am going to show you this video. So just thinking like, oh, math is the same in any language. The students, even if they're not very, even if they don't speak English very well, they should be able to understand what I'm saying because, you know, it's math, it's the same everywhere. So I don't know if anybody speaks any Spanish. I speak just a tiny bit of Spanish, and I also, as do all of us, have a large background in math. This is just for a little perspective.
Segundos y altura en metros. Aquí vemos esta gráfica. En el eje de las X normalmente se pone la variable independiente, que en este caso es el tiempo. Y en el eje de las Y ponemos la variable que sospechamos tiene una relación o depende de esta variable independiente, y es la que ponemos aquí en el eje de las Y. En este caso es la altura. Vamos a ubicar.
I've already given up listening to what that lady had said. I wasn't sure how, what kind of background, there were any questions on any buzzwords that you've heard, or you may have heard people talking about BICS and KELPs before, BICS and KELP. So students that seem like they speak English but are still struggling with academic language, it could be that they're just used to or proficient with like everyday language, common language, and being able to communicate in a content level class is much different. There's not as many cues for them, less face-to-face interaction, more complicated words. The sheltered instruction, so that is where we teach the content level, grade level content, but with just adjusted language. Courtney, what else can I say about that?
Yeah, they're just the same like academic or content standards as the other like Algebra 2, but just some supplemental stuff to help their academic language and English proficiency grow at the same time.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that says that you can't really wait to teach, especially older students, until they're proficient in English. So if you waited until they were English proficient to teach them any algebra or Algebra 2, they would never get there. They would never learn all the content that they needed to learn. So sheltered instruction is a way to try to get them some content knowledge before they're proficient in English. And then WIDA is it's like the group that provides like testing materials and maybe some resources. There's a lot of the states are WIDA states, and so then if you get an EL student that's in a WIDA state, and North Dakota is a WIDA state, then you'll get access scores, and that's how you can tell what kind of level their English is at. It goes from 1 to 6. 1 is the lowest, and 6 is like near native proficiency. And then they get scored on the 4 different modalities too: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So it gives you a chance to see like where are they strong. Like maybe they have a higher listening score than a reading score. Well, then you know that student would be better with oral directions. Or some students actually have better reading scores than listening scores. So whenever you can provide them with something written, that would be better for them. So what kind of examples can you think of that are in math? So I don't know if we agreed on this, but let's pretend we agreed that there is actually a lot of language in math. Math is not the same everywhere, or it's not easy. It's not easier just because it's math. What are some examples of where you would find language in math?
Geometry is the big one for me.
So much vocab in geometry.
I have a German student who has a okay grasp on the English language in geometry. It is fun.
At Bemidji State, I have a student who's from Kyrgyzstan. And he came up to me after class, and it's a lecture class of 70 students, and came up to me after class one day, and he was almost angry, and he was saying, it's different for me. And he just rattled off a whole bunch of issues that he had, and not just with the language, but even with notation, and numerals, even written differently, things like that. But it makes you aware right away of everything you're saying. And the thing, that he mentioned first was, colloquialisms, when you're using figurative speech, anything like that. And if you're not being literal, it's automatically more difficult, I think.
Courtney, you were just saying today we had kind of a situation at school that didn't have anything to do with math, but they were saying that the student wasn't out of the woods yet, and the kids were so confused, like why are there trees now? Like that didn't happen in the forest. Like they didn't know.
No, Kathy, when you were talking about the notation, I think a lot of times, and the kids think so too, that like with learning English, that word problems are the hardest thing, and those are hard too, but notation is also just a big thing in math that if they don't understand what it's asking, when we ask our questions a lot with the notation, then it's hard for them to answer it.
The book did mention too that with the Common Core shift, there's been more emphasis on word problems, so now they have to worry about that too, along with the notation. Not that there wasn't always word problems in math, but here's just some of the things that the book mentions. I actually have a student this year who keeps writing, instead of period, he'll put a comma. Instead of a comma, he'll put a period, and just doesn't seem to be as simple as me telling him, don't do that, do it the opposite way. Like he forgets every time. So
yeah, I think there are a lot of cultures where, where we use a decimal point, they would use a comma, for example.
So this was the part that I thought was really interesting in this book that I keep referencing, is that, so all of those things, but also that mathematics processing relies heavily on language systems. I'm not going to try to explain all of that, but just the reminder that processing relies on language too. It's not, you can't just process everything with numbers. They need to understand the language to process it. And then this part I thought was interesting too, that there were 2 questions that decides if what you're teaching them is going to go into memory or if it's going to be rejected. And it's probably just extra tricky for EL students to be able to make sense of things, or to attach meaning to something, or just decide if it's relevant if they don't fully understand what you're talking about. Here were 4 strategies. I did think it was kind of interesting. So this book, it just like there was 1 sentence on each of these strategies. I wish that there were more information. But I did appreciate these 4 strategies. I think that they are helpful. I think they're mostly talking about word problems here, but I know that it used to be where we were just supposed to teach them like keywords, like if you see this word, just add the numbers, or if you see this word, just subtract the numbers. And I think this seems to put more emphasis on like actually understanding what it's talking about in the problem.
For that one, Heather, or anyone, do you ever have like vocabulary word walls in your math room that have like different key vocabulary and then some sort of graphic or image that helps explain that or helps kind of visualize that word?
Courtney is like, your classroom is an example. Like, it seriously though, it's like the example of her walls are great. You have stuff, well, you teach so many different classes, so it's probably hard, but you have lots of different word wall things and posters and
I have some geometry ones too in my room.
And do people seem to be okay with you keeping them up? Like, it doesn't seem, does anyone ever accuse you of being like unfair? They have the vocabulary up on the wall, or?
No, I mean, like we gave a quiz the other day, and one of the kids was like staring at the poster, and everyone's like, and then everyone turned their quiz in like, why did you keep looking over? He's like, well, the vocab was right there, and everyone's like, why didn't anyone tell us this? And it's like, it's been there this whole time.
Like in geometry, it's about to come up too, where like we have different triangle proofs, and like I think back a few years ago, like they were just writing like the definition of midpoint, and it's like it doesn't tell you anywhere anything that's a midpoint. Like, why are you just making up random information? And it's an angle also we're talking about, so why are you so like we organized it into posters of like, these are reasons for sides, these are reasons for angles, these are reasons for triangles, and that helps a lot. And it's not necessarily like multiple guessing, because you have to kind of know what you're looking for to use it as well.
Courtney, can you describe a little bit what you put on posters for supporting that vocabulary to visual acquisition?
A lot of it is just like kind of the vocab word, and then a kind of a visual of it. Like, I think everyone maybe, like alternate interior angles or whatever, and then have a picture of it on there type thing. Or Heather, I think, has them too, a lot of different ones for like vertical lines and horizontal, and a picture of those. When I did my master's study, the students like ranked some of the strategies I used, and they still like ranked the word walls as helpful, but it was like the least of the things that I did that they found helpful too. So I was like, well, I don't know, I'm putting all this work into doing this, and apparently whatever. But I think they do use it more than they recognize too, because you like all of a sudden they're like, well, I want to take this test in your room, and you're like, oh yeah, that's because I have some clues up here for you. But different. I put a couple formulas too that we use all year long, like your midpoint and distance.
Sorry, Heather, to interrupt, but like now I'm curious, Courtney, you just laid out that they ranked what was helpful to them.
Yeah.
So what were the things, or maybe you two are going there and I'm just totally blowing your whole presentation right now. But now I'm super curious of if the word walls were helpful, but not the most helpful, what did help them? What supported them as learners?
Like they ranked like the top one was just doing the reading, writing, listening, and speaking stuff that we have I think we have a lot of examples of those ones. They said, yeah, that one was the most effective of just doing different. I think sometimes too, like we get in the pattern of like, okay, if I give them 50 more problems like this, they'll somehow magically understand it. And they need to see it kind of a different way. And I think the reading, writing, listening, and speaking activities help them kind of see it or talk about it in a different way from what they said. they also really thought like graphic and Heather has a lot, I don't know if you have them on there, but
Maybe.
graphic organizers really help them. And then different like electronic type. I feel like sometimes the kids don't know what's good for them too. Like they think fun is good or whatever, but they did say like that like Kahoot and quizzes and stuff like that help them a lot too. But I believe it was reading, writing, listening, and speaking was the first one, and then the graphic organizers was the second most effective one, according to them.
When you say reading, writing, listening, and speaking, what do you mean exactly?
Here's an example of like a reading activity that we would do, just to get them to interact with vocabulary a little bit more. So this is in our linear unit. And then a listening activity would look similar to this, except the questions wouldn't be there. The graphs would just be there, and then you would have to just listen to me read the question and write down your answer. So the just the blank with number 1 would be there without the question, and you would listen to the question and write down your answer. And then speaking might look something similar to this. There would maybe be a bunch of graphs, and then it would say like, I'm not as good as coming up with speaking questions on the fly, Courtney, so I'm gonna throw you under the bus. Jump in if you think. Maybe like 2 graphs and say like, compare the slopes of these graphs, or maybe just 1 graph and have questions like to discuss with a partner, like what's the slope of this graph? What is the equation of the graph? Like what kind of line is it? Things like that. And then what was the other one? Writing. So writing would be anywhere from level 1s would just maybe be filling in blanks to sentences. Level 2s would maybe just have like a sentence starter. Level 3s and 4s and 5s would be writing more paragraphs with varying degree of support.
And like a lot of times too, like we might like if you take a quadratic or something, I tend to pick examples of stuff that we're doing right now. So
yeah.
We're solving quadratic equations right now. So we might have them solve the same one by factoring, by the quadratic formula, using a graphing calculator or whatever. And then like for a writing assignment, you could say like, which method do you prefer, and kind of explain your answer. And you could, I mean, depending on kind of what level they are on the 1 through 6, you can kind of adapt it to wherever they're at.
I totally did Wheel of Fortune.
Oh, tell me more about that.
There's so many vocab words in geometry. I split all the kids up into groups of 3. And then each one had to take a turn spinning the little life wheel that I had for dollar amounts in their group, and they had to guess a letter. And then the group, whoever was the person who was up, had to try and solve it if they could. And then the first group to solve it and get the definition right got bonus points.
That's cool.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
The kids had a blast. They want Deal or No Deal.
Yeah.
But a geometry version. So what my plan was is I'm going to have 25 envelopes. Each envelope is going to have a different number of bonus points in. And they can choose that envelope. They have to answer a question. If they get it right, then that envelope, gets opened. If it's one of the ones they don't want, if they have the envelope they chose and they keep it, they get that many points what's in there.
That's creative.
That's cool. Well, and just with the stuff that you're talking with too, like so we have like separate like speaking type activities that we make and stuff too, but anytime they, I think, can partner them off and like practice language with each other, like even if it's something simple as comparing their answers on a worksheet, or with the Wheel of Fortune maybe. We have different, like, it's probably not her idea originally, but we had a coworker that had an idea too of like, you give each partner A problem and partner B a problem, and they solve it and they should get the same answer, but it's 2 different like types of problem type things. I did that recently with like triangle sums type stuff. just that they do math, but then they have to talk to each other a little bit too.
Did you use it to differentiate too, Courtney? Did you like
Yeah.
purposefully give one kid an easier one or like a
Yes.
specific kind of problem?
Yeah, like some some, just like practicing their algebra more so of anything, of just like add them, get it equal to 180. Whereas other ones, you might give them like an angle on the outside type thing and kind of keep it guessing, because then they don't even really tell that the person's problem's harder or whatever. They just are kind of focused on their own thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't usually notice that one has a harder problem, I don't think. They just think everyone has different problems.
Yeah.
Today, to get my students talking, I actually offered extra credit for students that were talking, like mathematically talking, and I just walked around with a clipboard and like looked really official. And I had students talking to each other that I don't think they had ever said anything to anyone before, and some of the math vocabulary words that they were saying, I will offer 2 bonus points every single day if that's all it takes to get them discussing vocabulary. It's pretty great.
One thing I do vocabulary-wise, and most of you might be familiar with the Desmos calculator, but the student activities on there include a polygraph activity where students get matched up by the computer and they have to match a graph or some other condition, but they have to type in their questions to, it's kind of like that Guess Who game where they have to match, instead of 20 questions, maybe 5 questions where they have to come up with an unknown from the other student. And they have to type in, and the teacher can creep in on their conversations. So you can see the vocabulary that they're using. And if it's just superficial vocabulary or if it's math vocabulary that they're using. So again, it's the Desmos polygraph activities, and they're already teacher made, and Desmos calculator is terrific, but it's just another activity to get them speaking mathematically a little bit more. So try it out if you haven't yet.
And you can create your own too, can't you,
Correct.
Andy?
Correct.
Yeah.
Or edit somebody else's, the great teacher activity right there.
Seems like a good formative too, where you can see like, oh, they are just using these superficial vocabulary words. I better teach them what a vertex is or whatever.
It's funny too with how they eliminate it sometimes too, because they'll be like, oh, I was doing one on transformations, and they were like, is it out in the shape of an N or whatever? I mean, they try to use their vocab first, but then they use some other kind of funny stuff too. That we did that this summer with a group of ELs we had too, and just to like help support them, we kind of we let them try it, I think, the first round, and then we gave them some sentence starters like Heather kind of had at the beginning, to just like how they would ask some questions that would help eliminate different graphs based on whatever we were talking about.
So I have another one for that kind of activity. We had poster boards with different graphs, and then the answer you got was the different type of graph on another poster board. And there was 20 poster boards. You had to answer each question. Each answer that you got was on a different poster board. Then you have to go to that poster board after you got that answer. So
And
like
then
if you're
there's
a poster board 1,
Like a scavenger hunt, I think they call them.
it was a nice activity because it has kids moving.
And to check their answers.
Exactly. So like if you're a poster 1 and got a line of y equals 5, you have to go and find the poster board with line y equals 5, and then you can go to that one and then solve that one.
I bet they like that one too.
Oh yeah, it was fun, especially since the fact that, I wasn't talking and they could actually, walk around the room and not listen to me talk.
Yeah. You
I
can
like the
trick them
scavenger hunt too, because sometimes we do like the stations one where they just go, they can kind of pick the order that they go. And some of them will just be really lazy and try to like take pictures or whatever and then sit down. And then the scavenger hunt, though, you kind of have to be up and moving because you have to check your answer.
trick them into moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or essentially it's just cutting up a worksheet and putting it on there. Fun.
those are good activities though too, because even if they're so even if they're graphing or they're solving or whatever, like they're still having to understand the vocabulary of like, what does solve mean? What does factor mean? Which two things like that are so similar. Or I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but my students say, like to clarify directions, no matter what the directions are, they're like, oh, should I solve? So we have to solve it. Should we solve? Like they think solve is everything. They think solve is evaluate. They think solve is solve. They think solve is factor. They think solve is like just simplify. Like they think it's everything. And so
they also think like no solution is everything when something goes.
Or when there's decimals, they're like no solution.
Yes. Yeah. Or we were factoring the other day, and I think it was a prime one, and they write no solution. It's like, what are you doing?
It doesn't even I didn't even ask you for a solution, and you just said no solution. Yeah. So those around the room activities or scavenger hunts can help them practice like even understanding directions, I think, because a lot of times those activities will have like different sort of questions on them. So like you're factoring this, then you're solving this, or you're simplifying this. That's good. That's good for them to interact that way too. So this was just an example in the exponential unit. I think most people, I shouldn't say most, but some people maybe would just ask, like, give the situation, then they just ask the question. So maybe one vocabulary idea would be to like break up and ask questions, vocabulary questions about the different parts of the question instead of just jumping right to what is the population after 15 years. There was that reading activity. Okay, I think I'm gonna go back. All your ideas are so good. Keep them coming, but these are just the ideas from this book that I keep referencing. And I do think that they could have maybe given more information. There is literally like 1 or 2 sentences for each of these ideas. So their idea was like, draw pictures and symbols. And then it said just like, these students need considerable help in representing word problems through symbols and pictures, and like maybe one more sentence. So it didn't really give too many ideas. So I just put the titles up here. I don't know if these ideas or titles like jog any specific examples that you've done before or any strategies that you've used. The next one was create vocabulary lists. We talked a lot about the vocabulary. That was good. Help students select the correct operation. I don't know, I had mixed feelings about this one because I think I already mentioned this, but this makes me think that you're just, I'm sure this is not what they meant, but this makes me feel like the students already want you to just tell them what to do. So I'm sure that they mean like help the students analyze the problem and figure out for themselves what the correct operation is. But I do feel like students, if they're doing a word problem, so should I add or should I subtract? What should I do? Should I add? So should I subtract? Like they just want you to tell them.
I think that comes back to what you were saying about how linguistic processing math really is.
Yeah.
I know at UND, I taught a couple of semesters teaching elementary teachers mathematics. And, you know, there's a definite move away from, like you said, using keywords.
Yeah.
Because that's what everybody wants. They want you to take the linguistic piece out of it for them, right? Just tell me if it's this, I should always do that, right? They just want that. It's like chutes and ladders. They just want the chute, right? Or the ladder, right to where they're going to go. Without the verbal processing, which is so important, which builds structures for future understanding, right?
Yeah. I always say, I'm not trying to build like math robots here. Like we already have those. That's called computers. Like I need you to actually do the thinking.
And some of like, it's hard with what you said, like the lack of information maybe from the book on the example. Sometimes it's so tricky because the books I'm sure mean well in giving helpful strategies, but they're a lot of times based for like lower grades. And so on how to apply them for like an algebra problem or a geometry problem can be tricky.
So this maybe was for younger grades too, but also, unfortunately, we do sometimes have high school students that have either limited schooling or interrupted schooling. So it's hard to know how much to spend on basic operations though. Like at some point, just, I don't know, go back and forth. You just give them a calculator and just help them like with the language and help them like with the factoring and the solving and not worry about the basic operations. Or like at what grade do you say, good try, but.
Well, yeah, you hate to have them miss out on higher level processes because they're going back and doing, very basic things from years past. Yeah, so I just always think if you can keep them talking, keep them thinking, keep them moving.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they use so much a calculator to do this or that.
That's good to hear from a college perspective too, because we struggle with it all the time on, like, we have kids that are terrible at integer operations, but if they have a calculator, they can do, and they can think, but just some of those pre-skills.
Yeah, exactly. I always just say, I try to come up with bad analogies, but like, if you had a plant that was underdeveloped, because it didn't get enough sunshine in the first month of its life, you wouldn't just, sunshine it to death for the rest of it.
True.
Right?
That's a pretty good bad analogy. I like that.
Yeah. And it's not related to sports. I mean, I love sports. All the analogies you do are about sports.
I think I could make that analogy work better. But anyway, you got the idea.
Yeah, I like it. And I think too, just with how readily accessible calculators are now with phones and everything too.
This one in the book literally just said, encourage students to use all the information provided, including diagrams, to solve the problem. Seems like something good to do. Encourage them to use the information. This was another one.
We need to state the obvious.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Never hurts, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like you were saying, if they think that find the solution, like we need to solve it, then maybe
you're right.
Explaining the basics is sometimes necessary.
Right. Yeah, I can't say that I've never had to tell a student, like, how about you look at the diagram, because it does actually happen sometimes. Maybe it's better advice than I thought. So here's another one that I sometimes try to think of examples for high school too. So I don't know what kind of examples of manipulatives that you can think of.
Carl, I don't know if you've used these at all in geometry. I just bought them this year, but they're called like legs. Like it's like angle legs that or like the sides of an angle that you can snap together and kind of look at different like it just how, like, recently we were using it to help classify triangles, just because some of them have a hard time with the three angles, like kind of visualizing each one. So we'll take them out and like, okay, look at this angle, it's acute, this angle's obtuse or whatever.
Oh, those things.
Yeah. And so like today I was using it for like to prove side. Like I gave someone a red one, a green one, and a purple one, and then someone else the same ones. I was like, okay, like create a different triangle, and they're like, we can't. Okay, that's why we have side. And then my English is not the greatest today. I don't know, but and then I used it too for like parallel and like. We always talk about when you're setting up like an algebra equation of like, oh, they don't understand like when you plus them to get 180 and when you equal them to each other and whatever. And so if the students are struggling with that, I'll get these out and have them measure both of them and say, okay, are they equal or should they add up to 180? And they can, after they do it a few times and they're like, okay, I don't need those anymore. That was one of the ones that I really liked from geometry this year.
They seem like you can use them for a few different things too. They seem worth getting.
Yeah. And they have like that protractor here that you can snap them onto too.
That's cool.
And they come with some, I think you guys were all high school or in university, but they have like different task cards for elementary and middle school. that are different kind of like discovery type things.
I wonder if I should use those in math too, Courtney.
I was just thinking that too.
Yeah,
Probably.
to talk to you tomorrow about that some
Those are
more.
hard.
Yeah, they are. Would maybe help give them some more of that background knowledge so they are a little bit better when they get to you in a couple years.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, I just like, I find that it helps when you're trying to do things like the classify, the triangles and whatever, just for them to help kind of visualize one angle at a time.
This one I thought was a good suggestion too. I know that we don't want to take away all of the obstacles, but rewriting problems is a thing that could help. I do like the idea of putting the question first. Sometimes we'll do that actually in their test, the English test, the access test that I was talking about at the beginning, in the listening portion. Once the passage does get wordier, they will say like, I'm gonna ask you, and then they'll state the question, and then they'll read like all of the stuff, and then the question will come again at the end. So I've never actually done that with a word problem, but I wonder if that would help a wordier word problem if you put the question first, so they would know what to focus on.
I love that idea, and I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I hadn't either.
For any student, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
because sometimes, you know, you talk to them about reading and rereading a problem, and, you know, maybe on the first time through, you just look for, what are they asking me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to put that up front would be cool.
And it's kind of how like Darcy can help with this, but I think English, like when they're writing too, like they write their thesis statement first, so it's kind of transparent across different subjects too.
Yeah, it's true. I just put this example in here. A lot of times our students, I'm thinking of a specific unit that is first during our pre-calc class, and students will come to Courtney and I, and they like do not understand any of the problems, and it's because the teachers are trying to be so creative that they get so stuck on like, what's an Oompa Loompa, and they just can't even, like, we try to tell them it's just like a kind of candy, and they're like, but what does it look like? They just can't even get past the fact that I don't know what a Willy Wonka is. I don't know what a like I'd heard of a factory, but I didn't know it could be a chocolate. And then what's a Wonka bar? What's an everlasting gobstopper? And they sometimes get lost in like, what are the important words that you need to know, and what words was the teacher just trying to be like fun and creative, and we've got this really great problem about candy.
Just use soccer, then everything is great.
Yeah. They do like that better. One was just to consider using oral assessments and then take advantage of technology. The book mentioned something called the HELP math program, HELP math program, that was specifically for EL students. I didn't actually like Google it to see what it was. Courtney, have you heard of that?
No.
You're Googling it now, aren't you?
Yeah. What was the name?
HELP math program. I don't know if you guys just have like very few EL students, this maybe isn't as helpful, but and we do have some languages that are not as common, but using their native language to help discuss it is better if they can learn something in their native language and then just like transfer it over to English.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. So,
yeah.
You know, when I worked with ELL classes as a math coach, and a lot of times there would be students with the same native language, and sometimes I'd see teachers discouraging them from using native language. And to me, that seems sort of a shame.
Yeah. That
they couldn't help one another out with the math in their language. So in your master's degree, did you hear about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, it used to be kind of the norm, or I can't think of the word I'm trying to think, but like people used to think that English only was the best option. So they would encourage students to only speak English. That was like what was taught however many years ago. But now I think, I don't know how recently, but it is now realized that that's not actually a good idea. like you were saying, Kathy, if they use their native language, they can learn so much more because transferring information is a lot easier than trying to like learn something in a language that you don't understand. I don't know if I said that very well, but.
Very well, I think. And that's good to hear. That kind of
Mhm.
matches my intuition, but I hadn't ever read anything.
And I think it's like, I don't know, it's pretty obvious, like when they're using their language to talk about math versus like other things in the classroom. So I think, yeah, it's always been helpful when they're using it for math.
Yeah, their last idea was just to seek professional development opportunities. It's not very often that there's both EL training and math training. So anytime that we can get ideas from others, it's a good thing. And then I just found this random lady's quote that I thought was so true. Like if Courtney and I are trying to put together presentations, like it would be so great if we could just like do these things and then your EL students will have success. But it's just so complicated.
It is complicated because learning is complex, right? And so I love that you talk about interaction and chance to process. Well, this has been really helpful.
Yeah, everyone had some great ideas.
Yeah, and Heather, you make it so easy to have a conversation. So,
yeah, this was a good group. Thank you. You all put me at ease right away. So.
Anything else? Anybody have any questions or final wrap up words of wisdom?
Quick question for if you have a student who's an EL student and they are struggle busing something fierce, but they're super prideful, so they don't want to ask for help.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have any tips on reaching that kind of a student?
I think did we have a slide on relationships on one of our other presentations, maybe, Courtney?
Yeah, probably.
I don't know that it's going to be anything fast, but just slowly build that relationship. Are you helping? I mean, I assume you're helping other kids too, so he doesn't feel like he's the only one that needs the help.
No, that whole group is kind of is the lower group for geometry.
Okay.
But he just doesn't have the math knowledge to use the vocab that I put out there, as well as the confidence in himself to, look up the words and translate it into Spanish for himself.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of ways to reach out to him because, like we talk all the time. It's just he doesn't ask for help.
Do you ever just like force help on students?
Yes,
bad,
I do all the time to it.
Yeah. Yeah, but he doesn't like that.
No, he'll be sitting there like, he'll have his notebook out, but he'll be drawing his name in like really cool lettering. And I'm like, can you at least like try the problem that I have you working on right now? I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Right.
And I don't like, sometimes I've had more success with strategic partnering. I know that that's nothing groundbreaking. But by setting them up in strategic pairs. So, all right, student A, you're going to teach student B how to do blank and like explain it to them. And it's really just about practicing, but it can be a hidden way of slipping in some support to some of those students who might not ask for it. And then the other nice thing I would recommend maybe checking and seeing if some of those concepts are available via like a Khan Academy video. Even just in English, but a Khan Academy video or similar video series that you could provide for the student. And same thing, you can provide it to all the students. Say, all right, so here's a review for today's lesson. Here's this video. I'm sharing it with all of you. I'm posting it on our class website, or I'm sending it home via Remind to all of your parents. And so here's this video that you can use to review today's concept. And just some of those things I think Heather and Courtney made this point earlier. Frequently, I think the beauty of supporting English language learners is it actually makes you a better teacher for all your students, or at least that's how I've always felt. Like when I'm really being thoughtful about how can I help this student, I end up helping all my students because what I'm doing for that student also helps them review or learn more, or that kid who just didn't get that one concept.
The only other thing I can think of too is sometimes if you can try to think about what you're teaching and like think about like how would this, like how to break it down, or what specific piece might they have trouble with. Like I know Courtney, like if you're doing, before you even do like triangle stuff, like let's say before you even do side angle side, I know that you do some stuff with like colors and angles. Like sometimes they don't even, like they can't even tell the difference between an angle and a side.
That's how it is with some of them. Or like they're writing side angle side and you're like, it has two angles in it. Like, what are you?
Yeah.
So like a lot of practice with like marking diagrams type things, but yeah.
So if you can try to think of maybe something like that, that is like a 5-minute pre-skill that would maybe give them some confidence. But then the thing is, you have to like, I don't know. I don't know how long it took you, Courtney, but it took me way more than 2 years to know what those things were.
Yeah. And it's hard because sometimes it's maybe it's not like he just doesn't, or I don't know if it's a he or she, but just doesn't know what to ask. Like not so much that they won't accept help, but just not sure where to start maybe. And that's why I thought the partnering would be good too at first, if they could perhaps get it from a peer or just hear it a different way too. Ways that you've probably said, but some of them, just the way that they learn the language they're hearing or they're listening might be better than just like, because sometimes they'll say something out loud and you're like, I just said that 5 times, but there's like some of them that do need to say it for themselves for it to process. So that's where I think that partnering work could help too. And actually with what you said with Khan Academy, I think you said it was a Spanish speaking student.
Yeah.
The one that video that Heather showed earlier was in Spanish. So I wonder if there's videos that are actually available in Spanish too for whatever topics that would help. We don't actually have a lot of Spanish speakers at South, so I haven't really looked into a lot of those resources.
That is super helpful. So thank you guys.
Thanks so much to all of you for being on tonight, for taking time out of your Wednesday night and just having a little chill session, chatting math. Thanks to Heather and Courtney for bringing such stimulating conversation and such an important conversation, whether we're supporting English language learners or just students who need a little bit more support in our classroom. I think these strategies transcend to support all of our learners in a more holistic way.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.